The envelope was at the bottom of the morning's mail. Ada Renshaw moved the bills aside. She moved the church bulletin aside. The envelope underneath was plain, cheap stock from the trading post in Cheyenne. No return address. Her name was written on the front in a single line. She knew the handwriting. She knew it the way a woman knows the sound of her husband's footstep on the porch boards after 9 years of listening for it. Her hand stopped over the envelope. The seal was a small drop of red wax. The wax was fresh. She broke it with her thumb. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully. The letter was 3 lines long. Ada. I am not the one in the ground in Pine Bluff. I will explain everything when I can. Burn this letter the moment you finish reading it. Caleb. She read the letter once. She read it again. She read it a 3rd time. The coffee on the stove came to a full boil and began to spill over the lip of the pot and hiss against the iron of the stovetop. She did not move. The signature at the bottom of the page was her husband's. The looped C she had watched him write at the bottom of 9 years of receipts and contracts and the marriage license they had signed together in the spring of 1862. The way the B in his name leaned slightly to the right because his hand had been broken once when he was a boy and had never set quite straight. The signature was today's. The ink had dried, but it had not aged. There was no fading. There was no yellowing of the paper. The letter had been written this week. Her husband had been buried 7 months ago. She lifted her eyes from the page. She looked out the small window above the kitchen table at the cold gray light of a Pine Bluff morning in October. The cottonwoods at the edge of the yard had dropped most of their leaves. The grave on the rise behind the church was visible from this window if you knew where to look. She knew where to look. She looked. The wooden cross she had carved herself stood at the edge of the cemetery in the cold morning light. The cross had not moved. The grave had not been disturbed. The 7 months were real. The letter in her hand was real. Both of them could not be true. This is the story of Ada Renshaw and a man named Caleb Renshaw whom she buried in the spring of 1869 and whose handwriting arrived in her mail on a cold October morning 7 months later. It is the story of a widow who learned in the space of 3 folded lines that the body she had grieved was a stranger's, and that the husband she had buried was alive somewhere out in the cold country, and that he was coming home. This is Untold Tales of the Old West. Before we go further into this story, if slow-burn Western tales told this way, quietly, honestly, without rushing the parts that matter, are the kind of stories that stay with you. Subscribe so the next one finds you. Drop your city or your country in the comments below. I would love to know how far this story has traveled to reach you. Now back to Ada Renshaw and the letter on the kitchen table. Ada did not burn the letter. She folded it along the same fold lines that had been pressed into the paper before it had been put in the envelope. She walked to the small bedroom at the back of the house. She opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed she had shared with Caleb for 9 years and slept in alone for 7 months. She lifted the wedding quilt her mother had sewn for her. She placed the letter in the bottom of the chest. She placed the quilt back on top of it. She closed the chest. She walked back to the kitchen. She moved the coffee pot off the heat. She poured herself a cup. She drank it standing at the window. The cottonwoods moved in the cold morning wind. 7 months ago, on the 3rd Tuesday of March, her husband, Caleb Renshaw, had saddled his bay mare and ridden out before sunup to deliver a stallion to a buyer in Cheyenne. The ride was 3 days each way. He had told her he would be home the following Wednesday. He had not been home that Wednesday. He had not been home the Wednesday after that. On the morning of the 2nd Wednesday, Wallace Ord had come up the road on his own horse with his hat in his hands. A search party had gone out the day before. 12 miles north of the Cheyenne trading post, they had found a body in a dry wash beside the road. The body had been there long enough that the face was not recognizable. The body was the right height, the right build, the right clothes. There were no other men reported missing in that part of Wyoming territory the week Caleb had ridden out. Sheriff Marcus Brand had signed the burial certificate that same afternoon. She had grieved him through the spring, through the summer, through the early fall. She had carved the wooden cross herself in August. She had been baking bread for a dead man for 7 months. Or she had been baking bread for a living man who had let her believe he was dead. She did not know yet which was worse. She walked to the corner of the kitchen. The rifle her father had left her stood against the wall beside the wood stove. She picked it up. She checked the action. She loaded it from the box of shells in the cabinet above the pantry shelf. She set it back in the corner upright, where she could reach it without crossing the room. She moved the heavy oak chair from the kitchen table to the side of the room facing the front door. She sat down in it. She tested the line of sight from the chair to the door. She could see the door from the chair. She could reach the rifle from the chair without standing up. She nodded to herself. She got up. She built the fire in the stove up to a working heat. She set water to boil. She sat back down in the chair facing the door, and she waited until the water boiled. When it boiled, she made tea. She drank it slowly. She watched the door. A horse came up the road in the late morning. She heard it before she saw it. She rose from the chair. She picked up the rifle. She crossed to the front window. The rider was Wallace Ord. He was bringing the squash he had brought every Wednesday morning for 7 months. She set the rifle down beside the door. She opened the door before he had finished tying his horse off at the gate. Wallace. He looked up. He saw her face. He saw the door already open. He saw that she had been waiting for someone to arrive. He set the bushel of squash down on the porch step. Ada. Come inside, Wallace. I need to show you something. He came inside. She closed the door behind him. She walked to the bedroom. She came back with the letter. She set it on the kitchen table. She turned it so the writing was facing him. He read it. He read it a second time. He set his hat on the table beside the paper. He looked at the signature for a long moment. He had known Caleb Renshaw for 22 years. He had stood up at Caleb and Ada's wedding. He had taught Caleb to break a horse the year Caleb turned 16. He knew that handwriting. He knew the signature was Caleb's. He sat down at the table without being asked. Ada. Yes. I need to tell you something. She sat down across from him. He took a long breath. 3 months ago, in Cheyenne, I went down to the cattle auction at the Wilson stockyards. I saw a saddle on the rack at the back of the auction barn. The saddle was Caleb's saddle. I would have known it anywhere. I had ridden in that saddle myself when Caleb let me borrow his horse the autumn before he died. She was very still. I went to the auctioneer. I asked him where the saddle had come from. He told me a man had brought it in the week before to be sold. The man had not given a name. The auctioneer described him. The description was not Caleb. The man was shorter, darker. He had a scar above his right eye that Caleb did not have. He paused. I did not tell you. I told myself I had imagined the saddle. I told myself if I came to you with a story about a saddle at an auction in Cheyenne, I would only hurt you for nothing. He looked at the letter on the table. I was wrong, Ada. I have known for 3 months that something was not right. I let you grieve a man who may not have been in that grave because I did not want to be the one who made you grieve all over again. She did not say anything for a long moment. The fire in the stove ticked. The cottonwoods moved against the window. She picked up the letter. She folded it. She put it in her apron pocket. Wallace. Yes, I am not angry with you. He closed his eyes. The relief moved across his face the way water moves across dry ground. But I need you to do something for me. Anything. I need you to ride to Cheyenne tomorrow. I need you to find that auctioneer. I need you to find the man with the scar above his right eye. I need you to find out who he is and where he got the saddle. I will not go myself. If I leave this homestead, the town will notice. If the town notices, it will get back to whoever buried someone else under my husband's name. I need you to go quietly. I need you to come back and tell me what you find." He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "I will leave at first light." "Thank you, Wallace." He stood up. He picked up his hat. He stopped at the door. "Ada." "Yes. Whatever the answer is. You are not alone in this." She nodded. "I know, Wallace." He left. She watched him ride back down the road toward his own homestead. She rode into Pine Bluff that afternoon. She did not know yet whether to tell Sheriff Brand about the letter. She knew only that she needed to look at him when he answered one question. She tied her horse outside the sheriff's office. She walked in without knocking. Marcus Brand was at his desk. He looked up. He set his coffee down. He stood. "Mrs. Renshaw." She did not sit down. "Sheriff, 7 months ago you signed the burial certificate for my husband. How did you identify the body?" He looked at her for a long moment. He had been the sheriff of Pine Bluff for 11 years. He had answered hard questions before. He had not been asked this one. The body was the right height, the right build. The clothes matched what Caleb had been wearing when he rode out. There were no other men reported missing in that part of the territory that week. The face was not recognizable. "No, ma'am, it was not. You buried a man under my husband's name without examining him closely." He was quiet. "Mrs. Renshaw, I made the identification based on the information I had. If I was wrong, I was wrong. I will not pretend I did everything I should have done." She nodded slowly. She turned to go. "Mrs. Renshaw." She stopped. "If something has come to your attention, I would like to know. Whatever it is, you have my word, it will not leave this office without your permission." She looked at him. She thought about the letter in her pocket. She thought about who in this town her husband had needed to lie to 7 months ago. She did not know yet whether the sheriff was one of them. "I will remember that, Sheriff." She walked out. She rode home before dark. Wallace was gone for 4 days. Ada did not leave the homestead. She kept the rifle loaded in the corner of the kitchen. She kept the chair turned to face the door. She did her chores. She baked her bread. She milked the cows and fed the chickens and gathered the eggs. She slept badly. On the evening of the 4th day, just before sundown, she heard a horse on the road. She went to the front window. It was Wallace. He came up the drive at a walk. He swung down at the gate. He came up to the porch. She opened the door before he knocked. He stepped inside. He took his hat off. "I found him. Sit down, Wallace." He sat down at the kitchen table. She poured him coffee. She sat across from him. He drew a long breath. "His name is Eli Marston. He works the lower country south of Cheyenne. He moves between 3 towns. I found him in Antler Run, 2 days south of Cheyenne. He was drinking in the saloon attached to a small hotel. I bought him a whiskey. I told him I was a cattle buyer looking for hands." He paused. He talked easily once the whiskey was working on him. I asked him if he had ever come across anything strange on the trails between Cheyenne and the lower country. He laughed. He said he had come across a dead man in a dry wash 12 miles north of the Cheyenne trading post in early March. The man was wearing a fine wool coat and good boots and was carrying a saddle on the rocks beside him. The saddle was a working saddle, well made. The man had a knife wound in his side that had killed him slow. He had been dead at least a week when Eli found him. Ada was very still. Eli took the saddle. He took the coat. He took the boots. He took the man's money belt, which had $8 in it. He left the body. Why? Because Eli had a warrant on him for a knife fight in Colorado. He could not afford to be questioned. He took what was valuable. He left. She closed her eyes. Wallace. The body the search party found. The body in the grave. Yes. The body was a man Eli Marston had already stripped. No, Ada. She opened her eyes. Wallace looked at her steadily. That is what I thought, too, on the ride back. I thought Eli had stripped a stranger, and the search party had found the body afterward, and someone, Caleb, had put his clothes on the body after Eli had finished with it. but Eli took the coat and the boots. The body the search party found was wearing Caleb's coat and Caleb's boots. The clothes the search party recognized were not on the body Eli stripped. She did not understand for a moment. Then she did. There were two bodies. There were two bodies. The body Eli stripped was the first man. The body the search party found was a second man, dressed in Caleb's clothes, placed in the same dry wash 3 or 4 days later. Yes. Caleb put a second body in the wash. Wallace nodded slowly. After Eli stripped the first body and left, Caleb came down the trail. He saw what Eli had done. He saw an opportunity he had not been planning for. He had time before the search party would come looking for him. He could disappear if he wanted to. So he found another body, somewhere, somehow, and he carried that body to the wash, dressed it in his own clothes, and left it there for the search party to find. The first body that Eli had stripped was already gone. The dry wash had washed it down toward the lower country in the rain that week. The search party found only the second body, the one wearing Caleb's clothes. They thought it was Caleb because that was the only body in the wash. Wallace. Where would Caleb have gotten a second body? He looked at her. I asked Eli the same question. He did not know. He said the lower country has men who die in the cold, drifters, cattle hands, Indian agents who go between the reservations, men nobody is looking for. Caleb could have found one, or he could have paid one to wait, or he could have done something I do not want to think he did. I do not know, Ada. I do not have an answer for that. Eli did not know. The auctioneer in Cheyenne did not know. The only person who knows is Caleb. She sat with that for a long moment. The fire in the stove ticked. The cottonwoods moved against the window. She had been preparing herself for the answer that Caleb was alive. She had not been preparing for the answer that Caleb had put a second man in the wash, so the town would bury someone under his name. Her husband had arranged this. He had walked away from the marriage and the homestead and the 9 years they had built together. He had let her grieve him for 7 months. He had written her a letter last week and told her he was coming home. She did not know yet whether she would forgive him. She did not know yet whether the explanation he was carrying with him when he arrived would be one she could accept. She opened her eyes. Wallace? Yes. Will you stay tonight? In the spare room. I do not want to be alone in this house tonight. He nodded. I will stay as long as you need. She made supper for 2. They ate without speaking much. Wallace went to bed in the spare room. Ada sat at the kitchen table with the letter in front of her until the fire in the stove burned down to embers. She read the letter one more time. She turned it over in her hands. She held it up to the light of the dying fire. She looked at the way the ink had dried into the paper. She looked at the small crease where Caleb's hand had pressed the pen too hard at the end of the 3rd line. She looked at the place where his thumb had smudged the wax on the seal before he had let it dry. He had touched this paper. He was alive. She put the letter in her apron pocket. She built the fire back up. She sat in the chair facing the door. She drew the wedding quilt from the cedar chest in the bedroom and pulled it around her shoulders. The quilt smelled of cedar and the lavender her mother had pressed into the seams 40 years ago. She watched the door. She did not sleep. She did not know what time of night it was when she heard the wind change. She did not know how long she had been sitting in the chair when the first faint gray of dawn moved against the kitchen window. She did not move until she heard the horse on the road. The horse came up the road slowly. The rider was not in a hurry. The rider had ridden a long way and knew that the final mile required no urgency. She heard the hoofbeats stop at the gate. She heard the saddle leather creak as the rider swung down. She heard the boots on the path. The boots were measured. The man walking up to her porch was not running. He was not hiding. He was a man coming home the way a man comes home after a long absence. The boots stopped at the porch step. She heard the man stand there for a long moment without coming up. She heard him draw a breath. Then he came up the porch steps. He crossed to the door. He did not knock immediately. She heard him standing on the other side of the door. She heard the small sound of his hand resting against the wood. The knock came. 3 slow taps. The same rhythm Caleb had used at her bedroom door the morning of their wedding 9 years ago, when he had brought her coffee in bed because she had been too nervous to come downstairs. She closed her eyes. The voice came through the door, low, unhurried, 7 months older than she remembered. "It is me, Ada." She did not open the door. She stood with her hand on the door handle and her eyes closed, and her breath coming slow and even. Behind her, she heard the spare room door open. She heard Wallace come out with the rifle. He did not speak. He took up his position at the corner of the kitchen, the rifle aimed at the front door. She drew a breath. She did not know yet whether she would open the door. She did not know yet whether the man on the other side was the husband she had married, or a stranger who had used her husband's name to walk away from a life he had not wanted to live. She knew only that he was here. She knew only that the 7 months of grief and silence and cold mornings alone were over. She knew only that whatever happened next was going to be hers to decide, and not his, and not the town's, and not the man in the wash who had been buried under his name. She opened her eyes. She turned the door handle. She opened the door. This is where we leave them. A small homestead at the edge of a town called Pine Bluff. A cold October morning. A widow who is no longer a widow. A man on the porch who has come home 7 months after the town buried him. A neighbor with a rifle in the kitchen. A letter in her apron pocket. A grave on the rise behind the church with a stranger in it. The story of what Caleb Renshaw will tell his wife in the next hour and what she will decide to do with what he tells her is a different story. It is told the way the Old West actually felt. Not loud, not rushed, not dressed up for the cameras, but deep and patient and earned. If this story stayed with you, drop your city or your country in the comments below. I would love to know how far it traveled. Until then, ride safe, partner. This has been Untold Tales of the Old West.